Chapter 26. At once, Sargon gestured for Basil Amor to follow him out through the door, toward the northeast area of the observatory. Feeling the anxiety get the better of him, Basil watched Sargon stop on the stone landing outside, deftly peering up into the darkened skies, searching through the never-ending abyss of glistening twilight. He closely watched these odd mannerisms of his uncle, his head twitching one way and then jarring another, until he turned, noticing an array of impressively dressed people weaving through the various garden paths, drifting toward the lavish dining area. A smile formed across Sargon's face. "My husband," heard the softest, most delicate voice over Sargon's shoulder. Sargon's dimples peeked through his perfectly curled beard.
"I could smell you a lifetime away, my darling,"
he murmured, still glancing out over the twinkling horizon. He finally turned around.
"You forever take my breath away,"
he affectionately murmured, leaning to kiss her soft, wine-colored lips. Basil whipped his head over his shoulder to see the ever-so-radiant Evelyn running her hand down Sargon's spine. She spied Basil. "Dear nephew," she nodded, her brown eyes shimmering within their lone luminosity. She was followed by her stunningly beautiful daughters, who were partially obscured by the shadows of the gardens, standing ever so politely behind her.
"Good evening, Aunt Evelyn,"
Basil greeted. All four women were adorned in silken tuxedos, fitted within gem-encrusted robes. Delicate golden jewelry dangled from their ears, jewels so foreign and illustrious. Basil knew they must have been otherworldly, as they glinted through the mountains of long black, wavy hair, arranged in beautiful styles. He intuited the importance of what was unfolding, and felt that their finest manners were expected. On the other hand, Basil could also sense Maud salivating at the corners of his mouth, and his incessant stares at the women was at the brink of being mildly impolite.
"Gosh, I can't take you anywhere,"
Basil thought incredulously, giving him a swift, sharp nudge. As Sargon gradually strolled down the stairs, with Evelyn gliding by his side, and Hadwana flashed Basil a warm smile, gently holding out her arm for Basil to receive it. Cyrilla took Maud's arm, Phanesra and Perseus linked theirs, and slowly they all wandered toward the circular terrace beside the cliff. The numerous guests who had arrived greeted them all with a bow as they passed, standing aside courteously. Basil even recognized several of them to be the men in Sargon's study the night before. This time, they had companions. The shimmering ocean was now calm, its endless waves rippling every so often with the glint of a soft moon rising in the east. But the calming ocean was no help to Basil, for he was hot under the collar. His nerves had once more got the better of him. He closed his eyes, inhaling the balmy breeze, listening to everyone shuffle into a perfect semicircle.
"Relax, dear nephew."
The soft words melted through his mind. He quickly glanced up, noticing Sargon watching him with deep affection, nodding ever so gently.
"Stand beside me,"
he whispered, squeezing Basil's hand within his, and together they moved out several yards in front of everyone else, facing the ocean.
"You are doing fine." "Oh, thank you, Uncle,"
Basil muttered, releasing a forceful sigh.
"I'm doing my best."
They all stood motionless, with the only sound of a distant melody, carelessly floating upon the salty air. Everyone was still. Everyone was silent. Basil turned over his shoulder at Maud, who was standing beside Cyrilla, and gave him a small smile. Out of nowhere, the Erunasis Medallion began to vibrate aggressively against Basil's chest, startling him. But before he had time to react, a streaking beam of blinding light shot down a couple of yards in front of his feet. He toppled backward in shock, saved only by the quick grip of Sargon's strong hand around his elbow. Regaining his composure, Basil quickly peered up into the darkness, noticing a large patch of stars, blacked out by an enormous elliptical-shaped craft, hovering high above them. He felt his stomach fall between his knees, gazing up at the colored lights, intermittently rotating around the perimeter of the craft. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, and was quite certain that Maud was struggling with it as well. The thick beam of light began to expand and glimmer, as if the skies had dropped 1,000,000 stars from the heavens. And with his eyes wide and heart thumping, Basil saw 6 shadowy figures, positioned in a V-type formation, standing before them all silently. Everyone watched in awe, and slowly, these dark, mysterious apparitions began to absorb life force, filling with color, gradually morphing into solid bodies, revealing to be explicitly beautiful people. The emanation of their radiance created a glowing field around their frames, and Basil found himself quietly choking on his own breath. 3 mighty men and 2 elegantly incandescent women were so still they could have been mistaken for statues, and they appeared to be concealing a very old man, cloaked within a long white robe in the center. Basil, unable to turn away, gazed up on the old man, his long silvery beard and hair gently flailing within the atmospheric disturbance of the pulsing field, enveloping them. A moment later, the old man glanced up, his icy blue eyes violently driving into Basil's. A man that Basil immediately knew, commanding nothing but supreme authority. The Erunasis Medallion succumbed to this old man's innate power and thrashed over the fabric of Basil's tunic, seemingly possessed. Another man, stoic in stance with his square jaw lining the mane of his black braided hair, was positioned at the front, while his counterparts, a blonde and a brunette man, stood deathly silent on either flank, appearing straight ahead. And lastly, the 2 women, blessed with an incomparable beauty, stood within the center of the formation behind the old man, their knee-length hair flattering their flawless complexions, adorned in elongated, gem-encrusted robes. The sheer brilliance exuded from every single one of them was well beyond the spoken word, and Basil wondered, who were they? Sargon gently nudged Basil to move forward with him, and they were now within 5 feet of the mysterious guests. And what happened next was astounding. With the exception of both Basil and Maud, every man standing at the circular terrace abruptly lifted their arms in perfect unison, and in one continuous movement, swiftly locked their hands onto each opposite elbow with a forceful slap, and they slowly dropped to one knee, lowering their heads in a very drawn-out, venerating bow. The inherent respect these people withheld for one another was indisputably obvious. The warm sea breeze fluttered around Basil's shocked face as he watched these men maintaining this formality for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, in flawless timing, all the men rose to their heads and stood to their feet. The women then took a step forward, the backs of their hands pressed together against the sternum of their chests. They too lengthened their spines and bowed in unison for a very long moment.
Step forward,
Came the quiet command from Sargon as the old man moved toward Basil.
Basil. Whatever happens, just try to relax.
Basil staggered forward, slipping into this glowing, milky field, quickly feeling every single hair on his body zapped with electricity. The old man thrust his hands over the Erunasis Medallion, and with the most dazzling blue eyes imaginable, crushed the oxygen in Basil's lungs and tore through to the deepest parts of his soul. The old man then punched his hands high into the night sky, and a golden beam of light shot out from them. And it was at this moment that Basil swiftly felt his legs give out from under him, and everything went black. The old man's haunting voice murmured all around him. Swirling white energy flooded into Basil's vision until it was replaced by a gazillion stars, galaxies, and universes slipping him by. What he didn't know was that he was now hovering above the ground, and his eyes had become completely white. At last, a huge suck of energy pushed against his chest, and he felt oxygen greedily force its way into his lungs once more. And within a blink of an eye, he found himself standing on his own 2 feet beside Sargon again. The glowing field around the mysterious guests had vanished, and the atmosphere had swiftly become an informal one, more akin to an earthly greeting. Filled with an unsurmountable delight, everyone ran and embraced each other, shedding tears of joy and exchanging many smiles and kisses. Basil, on the other hand, was so stunned that he stood back in a daze.
That was the most unbelievable thing I've seen.
Maud cried over his shoulder. Basil turned to see Maud's face riddled with awe.
Really?
He asked.
What happened? You were floating above the ground, mate. Thought I was going to pass out myself.
Basil felt a tug at his elbow. He could smell his uncle's intoxicating cologne close by.
Dear nephew.
Sargon smiled, rubbing Basil's back, watching everyone greet each other.
Uncle.
Basil frowned.
What just happened? I will explain at the feast.
Sargon answered, watching the statuesque man with the braided hair, heading toward them with the old man. The man, extremely handsome and impeccably dressed, clasped Basil's hands within his, instantly zinging Basil with his powerful energy.
In the light of the most radiant one,
his deep, calming voice began, turning to the old man.
May I present to you Tava, father of the planet Myora.
Looking a lot less scary than he did a few moments ago, Tava, without a word, took Basil's face within his warm, wrinkly hands and kissed him on the forehead